Grace and peace, everybody. Welcome to Berean TV. We got Pastor Jerome Gay of the Urban Perspective and Vision. What's the name of the church?
Vision Church in Raleigh,
Vision Church in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yep.
Talk to us, Pastor. How are you? What's going on?
Man, I'm doing good. I'm excited. Just coming off of a great weekend in Philly at the Frequency Conference. So I was just really amazed by what God did for those 2 days in Philly. We're just seeing tons of scholars talking about different topics, and specifically in the areas of race, justice, and human dignity. So I'm just excited, man. I'm doing good. How about you?
Great. I was so surprised at what I heard. I'm very excited about the conference and everything that went down. But I brought you on here for a specific reason. I've been dealing with people, and I'm getting so many emails about Nicaea, the Council of Nicaea.
Right, yeah.
So many people are confused, and I said, well, let me. Being I have a pastor here, let me get you on. And they say most pastors never even heard of the Nicene Council and how Christianity was invented there. And I actually saw that in the book. I've seen a couple of videos, and I talk a little bit about it. But how do you feel just hearing that Christianity was invented at the Nicene Council? Have you ever heard of the Nicene Council?
I've heard it several times, in particular, primarily from the Kemetic community. Kemetic guys that are into, or guys and girls that are into Kemetic science. They say they receive tons of misinformation. And so the first thing, just in case people don't understand, that the councils were ecumenical councils. And an ecumenical council is basically a bunch of bishops got together, and they were trying to decide certain things in relation to the church that already existed.
And what was already going on in the church.
Existed. Yeah,
that's very important. How do you know that, though?
Well, when we study history, and we study history of church fathers as well as Jewish historians, we're able to gather this information, which you'll find out in particular about Council of Nicaea in 325, that Constantine did not invent Christianity at the Council of Nicaea, because he had already issued an edict known as the Edict of Milan 12 years before the council.
And what was that about?
The Edict of Milan was just really making it so that Christians would stop being persecuted. So let me say that again. The Edict of Milan was about Christians, meaning that Christians had already existed before the Council of Nicaea, so that these Christians would stop being persecuted, because Christianity was one of the most persecuted faiths during that time. Now, Constantine was into polytheism. Romans were into just believing in many gods, so it wasn't like they were trying to make Christianity exclusive, but they wanted the persecution of Christians to stop. And they were seeing the popularity of what people had believed about Jesus. So he issues this Edict of Milan to stop the persecution, making way for it to be one of the legal religions in the area at the time.
And that wasn't nothing about control or anything. It was just something that was already going on. I often hear people say it was a political move. It was a political move, and they wanted to bring Jesus, a white God, in. What do you say?
Well, I would agree to some extent about it being a political move from Constantine's position.
Okay.
But I would not say it was not a tool of control for black and brown people, because one of the leaders at the Council of Nicaea was a guy by the name of Athanasius. And Athanasius was a Christian. He was African. And he was also known as the Black Dwarf because of his dark skin and his short stature. So I want you to hear this. So in 325, at least over 1,000 years before the Middle Passage of 1619,
that's correct,
there were black Christians who were arguing for the faith, who were also intellectual and theological, fighting for the faith. And at this particular council, he went against another guy known as Arius.
Yes.
And the issue at hand at the Council of Nicaea was the essence of Jesus. It was not about creating the Christian faith. As we've already established, an edict was issued 12 years prior.
Already.
Christians had already existed. And then we got Josephus' writings 200 years before the Council of Nicaea.
That's correct.
So when we begin to study history, we're able to see these things. But what a lot of these cats do that try to say is invented, they're using Google scholarship instead of actual scholarship with books and footnotes. But back to the council. So Athanasius was going against Arius. Arius was trying to say that Jesus was a created being. And so this is why one of the things you see in the actual Nicene Creed is that he was begotten and not made. And so it's important that we understand a black African man led this, because if not for his leadership, there would be tons of heretics following in Arianism.
But the thing is so crazy is this is the first time some people are hearing this, because the way the conscious community teach it, that there was a bunch of white folk in the room, and these white folk got here and picked books in the Bible and made Jesus God right there.
Well, again, they're wrong about that because, again, there were Africans there. And then if you just even look at the scriptures, you got the Coptic church already established. And many would credit the Ethiopian eunuch based on Acts chapter 8 as founding the Coptic church. So it's historically inaccurate to say that Constantine invented Christianity and that there were no black people present at the council. One of the leading voices, in fact, the leading voice was a black African man by the name of Athanasius. And again, this was over 1,000 years before the transatlantic slave trade. Now, when they try to talk about the scriptures were not voted in the Bible, but it was the Council of Carthage at 397.
That's correct.
And so in 397, it's important that you understand this. The books were already established.
The canon, which we call the canon.
We call that the canon. The
Yes.
66 books. What they were talking about is making sure that the Apocrypha was not included as canon, as the books that should be written, and the books that were written during what we know as the period of silence. The period of silence is the 400-year gap between Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, and Matthew, the first book of the New Testament in our English Bibles, because really Mark was probably written first, as known as Mark in priority. But in terms of how our English Bibles are written, it's a 400-year gap, and so the apocryphal books were not included. And so that was 397. So they weren't voting on and making the Bible. It's important that we understand in 325, Christianity had long been established. They were called Christians at Antioch, Acts chapter 11.
11:26.
So we already had that established based on redemptive history. But what happened in 397 was they wanted to be clear on what was inspired,
yes,
and what wasn't.
And what wasn't. Excellent, excellent. What do you think there are any sources? What do you recommend that someone read? A lot of people look at videos. What do you recommend? I know Josephus is important. I tell people, and they understand that they just can't pick up a video and just watch certain videos. They have to look. I often tell people they have to understand timelines. If they understand timelines, they won't get confused. You don't have to be a historian to know history, but if you understand timelines, people just can't tell you anything. What do you think somebody is good for someone to read if they wanted to kind of understand that?
Well, I would say I would get writings on. And let me say this: we've talked about in other talks about the whitewashing of history. And so even though we know these men were African, many of them were of a darker hue, the books that you read on them will have white men on the covers. That's just a sad reality we're dealing with, but it does not mean that we should negate the historicity of what these guys did. So I would read.
Wait, so now you're a Christian pastor.
Yes, I am.
You're not a Muslim. You're not a black Hebrew Israelite. You're a Christian pastor, and you're admitting on video that Christianity has been whitewashed.
Absolutely. In fact, so one of the books I would recommend is How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind by Thomas Oden, because what Thomas Oden captures in his book is how a guy named Adolf von Harnack intentionally removed all black and African contribution to Christianity. And so with the whitewashing of Christianity, you had the whitewashing of scholarship, and so then black and brown contributions to the faith, to philosophy, to monasticism, which it's important that we understand. Monasticism, which deals with being a monk, started in Africa. The Library of Alexandria was in Africa. Correct. Philosophy was in Africa. Origin of philosopher was African. And so we got this rich history of intellectual fortitude and prowess that was whitewashed and negated by white supremacists. And so there was a systemic issue to whitewash history. And so that's why many of these books may have white faces on them, but it does not negate the historicity of what these men did. We just got to recapture the full extent of history, because God has used people of all hues in order to draw people to himself. So I would say how Africa Shaped the Christian Mind by Thomas Oden. I would read, again, it might be a white man on the cover, but we know he was the Black Dwarf. Read Athanasius' writing. I would read the Church Father Augustine. That's another African church father, Augustine. So these are people that I would read. I read Oneness Embraced by Tony Evans, because he chronicles the black and brown presence in Scripture by name, chapter and verse, and giving you the history of these people.
Pastor Tony Evans.
Yeah, Pastor Tony Evans. When we see Nimrod, a person of color, David, a person of color, John Mark, again, whose gospel was written first, he was a Cyrenian Jew. A person of color wrote one of the gospels. So when they try to say all these things, when they try to say, well, Constantine and all these white people invented Christianity, is historically inaccurate. And to keep saying that is disingenuous, and you can't call yourself conscious if you're ignoring logic and history.
All right, all right. But I know some people probably hit me and say, well, this guy has some type of every time people start, you try to put history in its proper perspective, people get, especially my European brothers and sisters, they get a little leery. Or do you feel you're racist by saying that?
No.
The stuff that you're saying? You're talking a bunch of blackness.
No, I'm responding to racists. And so what I'm doing, I'm responding to racists and racism, because as we've established, they have whitewashed history. Now, some of our current white brothers and sisters may not be perpetuating this myth, but we are still dealing with the effects of the myth. When we go to our reformed institutions, all we see is white faces. We see a white Jesus on the front of my book, my New Testament. It's a white Jesus on the cover at the seminary that I went to. Athanasius, they made him look white. And so these are the things we're talking about. We're saying
color doesn't matter.
It's interesting that color doesn't matter when you've already put a white face on the book. If color doesn't matter.
Oh, somebody's texting me. If color doesn't matter, go ahead.
Yeah, then why? if it doesn't matter, then why would you whitewash history that way? And so I'm not racist. I mean, I pastor a diverse church. We're about 79% black, 19% white, and 1% Hispanic. So this is the church. I'll say 2%. This is the church that I pastor, and so we're excited about that diversity. But I think authentic diversity is when we can talk honestly about what happened, which is why we're seeing even some of the protests now, is because we want to make these people as if somehow the Confederacy is something that we should celebrate. Read the Articles of Succession, and when people try to say something, well, it's about their rights. Their right to do what? It was for their right to own people.
Yeah,
so again, when you just try to whitewash and sanitize aspects of our history that reveal total depravity, then we should be called out on that. And so to try to label someone a racist because they're talking about something that actually happened, now it's not that I'm a racist. No, you're a race evader, because it makes you uncomfortable to confront the effects of white supremacy and the past of white supremacy.
Tell us about the YouTube channel. Are you going to be talking more about this? What's the purpose and that you have in mind with first formulating that channel?
Well, first, let me thank you, because you inspired me just seeing Berean TV and all the work you're doing to be able to talk about these topics to equip and empower the church. So the urban perspective is something I wanted to do I wanted to have some intentionality of having the initials UP, urban perspective, because I want to take our people higher. And so as we have these discussions, we're able to build, we're getting empowered. And so I'm bringing on scholars of different expertise to be able to speak to some of these issues, also provide resources. That's why I show you books and authors when people are mentioning different books, because I want our people reading, I want us being educated, and I want us empowering our people from a heart of love based on the gospel and what Christ has done for us. And so this isn't a black thing. This is a human dignity thing.
Okay.
And based on the Imago Dei, all people, even non-believers, deserve dignity and respect.
Even non-believers,
because they are made in His image.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. So what can we expect from you coming up by way of videos?
Yeah, well,
in the next couple of months or weeks or whatever.
I'm looking forward to you and I continuing to chop it up, and we're going to talk some controversial topics. We're going to talk about slavery.
Yeah, okay.
People talk. We got to touch on that. About women in the Bible. Is the Bible does the Bible promote gender oppression? Does the Bible condone rape? And we're going to bring on Doctor. We're going to bring on a sister. We're going to bring on somebody else about that dealing with the women's thing. Yeah, we're going to have brothers and sisters on that can speak to that. So I'm excited about that, and we want to continue to just put out good content. So that because so many people are going to Google and YouTube for scholarship. Yes. Well, we want to at least we still want to encourage you to read. Me and Berean, get some books. Get some books with footnotes. With footnotes. Books with footnotes. Don't be Google scholars and just getting freestyle. Yes. Yes. But YouTube isn't a bad thing. So we want to utilize technology for God's glory and want to continue to put good content out there. How can we get in touch with you? Well, you can hit me up on Twitter. On Facebook? Yeah. On Facebook at Jerome Gay Jr. So you can Jerome Gay Jr. You see me there. On Twitter is at Jerome Gay, and then the YouTube channel is The Urban Perspective. The Urban Perspective. Doctor, it's good to have you here. We appreciate it. We're going to be doing a lot more of this. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. Thanks again. Thank you. All right.